Live your life in daddyhood.
Welcome back to Daddyhood, the podcast where we talk about all sorts of paths to parenthood. Today, I am very excited about this conversation. I am joined by CEO Khaled Kteily. He has an incredible company, Legacy Sperm. We're going to get into that more, but I'm going to read directly from this so I do not mess up his bio. You ready for this? Here we go. Khaled is the founder and chief executive officer of Legacy. He is a former healthcare consultant at Oliver Wyman in Toronto and studied healthcare and public policy at Harvard Law, where he received a full scholarship and graduated with distinction. Khaled has previously worked at the World Economic Forum in Geneva, where he had his work on the future entrepreneurship published at Davos. Khaled is also a member of the American Society for Reproductive Medicine and the Canadian Fertility and Androgenology Society. In today's episode, we're going to dive into the beginning of my journey to the path to parenthood. The topic is fertility. Here we go. Welcome, Khaled. I have been on this journey now for a year and a half. It started with fertility. And for me, it started in a very, just drastic and sort of heartbreaking and confusion and overwhelming experience with my fertility numbers.
Right.
So I think, just catching viewers and listeners up, when I first went in to meet with my doctor, the first step is, hey, we need to collect a sample to see where you're at.
How was that process?
I will say in California even, which protects and makes you feel comfortable, protects your rights, makes you feel comfortable in the experience. It was the most unpleasant and I just did not feel comfortable. Yeah. You're in a doctor's office. Yeah. You're going into a room where everybody knows what you're about to do in that room.
Yeah. Did they call it the specimen when they were talking about your semen sample?
Yes.
Yeah.
Specimen.
The specimen. I don't know why that always...
Go collect the specimen.
Yeah, yeah.
And I'm like, oh, right here in this room next to 7 other people who are going to watch me enter this door.
And by the way, everyone knows exactly what you're doing in that room.
Yes.
They know why you're there.
Yes.
Yeah.
And the clinic is great. I'm very happy where I'm at with my doctor, and they've taken such good care of me. I just don't logistically know if the office could do a better job of being more discreet. But it was very uncomfortable.
Yeah.
And after learning about your company and what you're doing, it's exciting because what can be so challenging and so hard for so many people, you have a solution to. Yeah. So I want to give you the opportunity to talk about Legacy. As someone who's used it, I want to go over results with you that from my results, and just get to the bottom of fertility. So thank you for being here, and thank you for joining me.
Thank you for having me, Colton. It's great to be here.
So I want to start from the beginning. What was the inspiration of creating Legacy?
Yeah. So it's interesting to hear you tell your journey on the path to parenthood, because I actually had a very similar experience at a clinic. I was in Cambridge, Massachusetts at the time, and it was around that time that I had a really bad accident with hot tea and hot coffee. Spilled all over my lap, gave me second-degree burns, and made me worry that my fertility might be affected. Wow. Right? So you usually, as a guy, don't really think about this until your genitals are directly affected. And it was around that time I said, okay, well, wow, thank God that wasn't worse, right? A second-degree burn isn't permanent. It healed after about a month and a half, but it was a very painful accident. And so I said, you know what? I know that I want to be a husband and father someday. So why don't I test my sperm, make sure it's good? Let me freeze my sperm and make sure I can use it in the future. So that's what I did. I found the local clinic. I literally Googled sperm bank in Cambridge, Massachusetts. I got some very weird Google ads afterwards.
And what year was this?
Yeah. This was like 2014 at this point. This is a long time ago.
Got it.
Almost a decade ago at this point. And so found the local clinic and had almost the exact same experience. And again, the clinic was great.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, you are being asked to masturbate in what is effectively a large closet. Right. With a black leather couch. And
with people waiting outside the door.
People are waiting outside. I had 10 minutes. They're like, sir, actually, we have a patient right after you. So, you have approximately 10 minutes for the room. And it's plenty of time. That's fine. Right? But still, it's a very awkward experience. And everyone knows what you're there to do. Yeah. I remember I walked in, I turned off the lights, and, the door didn't make it all the way down. So there's like a little sliver of light. And so you can see the shadows of people walking by. They're laughing. They're talking. It's a normal work day for them. Meanwhile, you're sitting there, trying to produce a sperm sample, or what they call the specimen.
Yes.
So went through the process. My results were fine. I froze my sperm. But first of all, I paid, I think, about $1,000 all in, right? Yep. Meaning it was not a trivial investment.
Right.
it was the most awkward, or one of the most awkward experiences I've had in my life, as having lived it yourself.
Yeah.
And I just got so fixated in this idea, well, why does it have to be to clinic? What if you could do it from home? What if you can make it more affordable? What if you can make it more accessible? What if you make people feel empowered about the fact they're doing this instead of feeling like you're sick and unhealthy and going to a clinic? How could you just totally revamp the experience? So that's what set me down the path of ultimately starting Legacy, but a journey very, very similar to yours.
Yeah, well, a journey similar to, I think, pretty much everybody who has to produce their sample.
Yeah.
I remember that very well. And same, Jordan and I went together.
Yeah.
And then on top of it, they do get your results pretty quickly.
Yeah.
We sat in the waiting room, waited to meet with our doctor. And I remember this, he had the printouts of all of our results and went over them. Jordan's, of course, were great. And then he gets to mine, and I forgot exactly what he said. He was just like, well, you have a few that are moving. I can possibly make this work. And it
possibly make this work.
I mean, it was like my levels were so low, and just all of the different grades. And I've obviously learned more now. But essentially, I had to enter sperm rehabilitation for 6 months.
And you're young, you're healthy, right? You would actually probably imagine that your sperm results would be phenomenal.
I was floored, to be honest. And the other thing that I think stuck out to me too is like, once again, love the clinic, love my doctor so much.
Yeah.
It was all number based. There was no hand holding
Yep.
during the experience. It was no like, I don't know how to break this to you. It's like, well, pretty much all your sperm are dead. Yeah. I was like, oh, what is that?
And they do it so often. They're doing it every day. To them, it's totally normal to say this. For you, this is potentially like life-shattering news that you're receiving. Right?
Well, and I, long story short, we end up walking out of the clinic, and Jordan gets to freeze his sperm, and I don't.
Oh wow!
So it was sort of even that dramatic too, where I'm just like, okay, well, our plan was to start with his DNA first anyway. So I was like, well, all right, at least like we've got his collected and we're good to go. I have to figure out what I need to do. Yeah. And we can get into that too. But I was like, oh shoot, that means I have to come back here. That was immediately in my head. I was like, that means I have to produce more samples and I have to come back to this clinic to do it. Yeah. And I think that's, when I first discovered Legacy, I was like, this is genius. Yeah. This is what I needed. And also, not what I needed, but I think the queer community, because I'm in California and we are protected in many ways. I could not imagine if I had to do this in a Texas or a Florida or somewhere where I know, there's people that don't agree with your life and who you love and the family you want to build. Right. So can you talk about the impact that you feel like you've had on the LGBTQ plus everyone in our community?
I mean, you're touching on a really important topic because, again, you're in California, super liberal, super open-minded. I always remember a phone call that I had with a trans woman who was, born biologically male, about to begin the transitioning process, and she froze her sperm through us in Arkansas. And she said, before I came to you all, I had gone to a clinic. And first of all, it was an 1.5-hour drive away. And by the way, about half the country is actually in what we call a fertility desert, which means they don't have easy access to a fertility clinic. Wow. Right? And she says, I felt such a deep sense of shame going into the clinic. I was judged. I was looked down on, right? Because obviously very different than California. She said to be able to do it from home, right, was just a game changer for me. And we hear that a lot from, men in same-sex relationships, like members of the LGBTQIA plus community more broadly, but just men in same-sex relationships already have an inherently more complex fertility journey. Yeah. Right? You're thinking about things like, how are you going to have a child, right? And so to have a way to test or freeze your sperm that is going to be humanizing, not dehumanizing, right? Like friendly and approachable, not super clinical and cold the way that you described. Yep. And then even just to make it affordable. You have so many costs. If you're thinking about adoption or surrogacy or all these other paths you might go down, it's expensive. Yeah. Right? And so any opportunity you have also to bring down your overall cost is great. And so that's kind of where Legacy comes in.
Can you walk me through, so say, I didn't know a lot about this. I've come across your website. Yeah. What is the steps and what's the process for Legacy for a customer?
I'll give you the short answer and the long answer. Step 1, buy kit. Step 2, masturbate. you're basically done.
Perfect. Easy enough.
Easy. The slightly longer answer is, so you'd go online, there's a few different packages that you offer. Our base package is about $295. That includes a full semen analysis, shipping to and from, everything that you need. We offer telehealth consults for free to anyone whose results are kind of abnormal or below the normal ranges. Because again, we want to provide that extra level of humanity and comfort and warmth at a time where people are really talking about a very sensitive.
I am all for that, because that was one thing that I was just like, oh, they just dropped this bomb on me.
Big time.
And I'm walking out of this clinic with more questions than I have answers.
Right, 100%.
And also, I was still processing when I got my first numbers and results back, where I didn't even have all the questions that I needed to ask. I just knew that I needed to start to work on it.
Yeah.
So that's incredible.
Yeah, which is wild. And so, so you'd pick a package online, you'd have a kit shipped to your house. So the nice thing is you're not at a clinic, you're not in a cupboard, there's no black leather couch, unless you have one at home, if that's your thing. You'd produce a sperm sample from the comfort of your own home. You then scan a QR code on the box, someone comes and picks it up from your home. It's that easy. We send it to our lab, we do a full semen analysis, and we can even do things like testing for DNA damage of your sperm. So we'll do all of that. We'll then divide your sample into two, and we'll freeze it in more than one location. So we have cryo storage locations all across the United States, and so we actually have redundancy built in. So let's say there's a earthquake in Texas, right? You actually have half your sample stored in another state.
Genius.
Let's say a state passes very unfriendly laws around freezing sperm or freezing embryos, for example. You have your sample stored in another state as well. And so all of this is very seamless, right? Really, it comes down to steps 1 and 2 for you, right?
Yeah.
Order the kit, masturbate, scan a QR code. That's basically it. And then, of course, you have access. We have an online platform. You get your results. Everything is very carefully explained. Here's what it means. Here's what you need to know. By the way, you can schedule a free consultation call with us anytime at all. Here's what you can do to improve your sperm if it is a little bit, worse than you would expected. And then on the other end of things, when folks have particularly strong samples, we also let them know. We're like, hey, by the way, you are actually in the top 10% of men like you, which always makes men feel,
I could never. But, and we're going to walk through my results. I have them. I'll pull my phone up towards the end of this and we can talk through it. And I did not use Legacy to begin with, but midway through, after discovering and doing more research in my own fertility journey, I came across Legacy, wanted to test. And so I've been through that process. And I can say from using it, it was the easiest thing I've ever done. And I wish that I would have started with you guys so badly. Yeah, and I think one thing that I discovered along the way was I view myself as healthy. I feel like I make a lot of lifestyle choices.
You look extremely healthy.
Well, I pride myself on living a healthy lifestyle. And I was one of the most unhealthy when it came to my sperm. In your opinion, why is that, and is that common?
So first of all, sperm is typically an overall biomarker for your health. So you're actually right that a typical man or a typical person producing sperm, right, would actually, their sperm quality would be reflective of, are you healthy? Are you working out? All of these things. But there's a lot of things that men don't know affect their sperm as well. And so this can be everything from, using hot tubs and saunas all the time. Like that heat is actually very bad for the scrotum, for the testicles, for spermatogenesis or the production of sperm. Excessive working out actually can be net negative. You'd assume it's a net positive because you're strengthening your muscles, actually negative. There's a lot of, chemicals, for example. So men who are taking testosterone, TRT, testosterone replacement therapy, is actually extraordinarily bad for your sperm. So if you're on TRT, it actually shoots your sperm production basically down to zero, making you effectively infertile if you're on TRT, right? We did a huge study, a nationally representative study of Americans last year. We published the results, and we found that if men who are taking testosterone, I think it was something about 2/3 or 70%, assumed that the testosterone would actually improve their sperm quality. Right? It's kind of a natural, logical thought. In fact, it's shooting their sperm production down to zero. And so there's all these other factors. There's lifestyle factors. There's genetic factors, which mean that you may get results that feel at odds with how you live your life and how healthy your life is.
Yeah, well, I can say that one of my first questions to my doctor was why. And he goes, well, are you doing this? And he said, hot baths or hot tubs? Check. He said, are you working out more than 5 times a week? And I said, yes. Am I on testosterone? Yes. I was riding my Peloton, still
Okay,
pretty
yep.
excessively, and which I guess riding bikes is not the healthiest.
Also not great for your sperm
Also
production.
not great for
Yeah.
you. And saunas and steam rooms.
Yeah. I mean,
So
so you were basically checking all the
I checked
boxes.
every single box. So he said,
Yeah.
here's the good news is we feel like
Yeah.
we feel like we can get your numbers back up.
Yeah.
And 6 months later, I had got my numbers back up. I made a bunch of different changes in my lifestyle. And we finally got them to a place where we were comfortable freezing them.
Amazing.
But I didn't know.
Yeah.
And here's the part two to that question is the more that I started talking about this with my friends and my family,
Yeah.
it's a little awkward to get into, right? You know, you're talking about sperm and fertility, and you're letting people in. It was very, very. I found it was so common,
Yeah.
and for a lot of the guys to be like, "Oh my gosh, I had the same thing. I just did."
Right.
You
Right.
carry so much shame. Men carry
people-
so much shame around it because it's not manly to not be fertile.
Exactly.
Men just don't want to talk about. It's their fault.
Yeah.
And I think that, for me, I think, I was stubborn in that too. When I hear the word fertility, I think women.
100%.
And I think a lot of men probably think that way.
Yeah. I
Until
think a lot of women think that way as well, by the way.
interesting. So in your work, have you seen, what are some interesting stories? What's some
Yeah.
interesting facts
Yeah.
that you've seen around that?
Well, first of all, you hit the nail on the head, which is the average person thinks that fertility is a women's issue, right? That is an outdated view. That is a view that is fundamentally wrong. So first of all, if you take a heterosexual couple that is trying to conceive, trying to have a kid together, about 1 in 6 will face infertility. 1 in 6 will not be able to conceive naturally within a 12-month period. That's a shocking statistic.
Wow.
1 in 6, right? That's a very big number. And we get lost sometimes, like 1, 6, 7, whatever.
Has that always
Big
been that way,
chunk.
or is this
And
recent?
it's gotten worse over time. So the
Okay.
WHO just released a huge study showing about 1 in 6 couples globally are facing infertility. That number used to be more like 1 in 7, 1 in 8.
Wow.
Right? So there's a lot of reasons for why it's going up, and we can talk about that a bit later. But fundamentally, it means that many people in your life, right, or anyone who's listening, if they're trying to have kids or their friends are trying to have kids, many are going to face problems. Off the couples that face infertility, and this is fascinating to me, about a third of it is due to male factor infertility.
Wow.
About a third of it is due to female factor infertility. And the remaining third is either joint or unexplained. What that tells you is the male partner, again, in a heterosexual couple, is equally responsible for infertility or fertility as the female partner. And that just flies in the face of everything we've ever learned about fertility.
Right.
Right? Women are taught from a very young age, hey, when are you going to have a kid? You have a biological clock. You need to be thinking about this at a young age. Fertility is all like the burden is on you as the female partner.
Yeah.
It's actually like, whoa, hold on. Men are actually an equal part of the conversation. It does actually take two to tango, right?
Mm-hmm.
And if you're thinking about having a child, like whether a biological child or with someone else, but the fact is your sperm is actually very important.
Yep.
And that flies in the face of a lot of what we've learned. And so a lot of the work we do is really just educating people. You'd be shocked at the number of women who think that fertility is fully on them. And we say, hey, we need to rebalance the responsibilities around family planning. We need to shift the burden away from women, bringing them all, also onto men as well.
Right.
And we found that actually over the last few years, men have been more willing than ever before to talk about this topic, to engage, to be proactive around their health. They're still pretty bad about it, but it's gotten so much better, especially after COVID.
So I guess my question to all that is, well, one, do men have a biological clock?
Yeah. Men do have a biological clock. It's a little different than women's.
Okay.
So women's biological clock tends to be steeper. So 35 is there's a more steeper decline in fertility. But what a lot of men don't realize is actually every year you get older, your sperm quality goes down. And so historically, we thought that sperm quality did not go down a lot for men.
Yeah.
Then in 2018, a large meta-study found that actually sperm count, sperm concentration is going down about 1% year over year. A more recent meta-study that came out last year by the same researchers found out that actually sperm counts and sperm concentrations are now declining by about 2.6% year over year.
Nobody's talking about this.
Nobody's talking about it. I mean, we're talking about this. You're talking about this now.
Right.
But there is this massive decline in sperm count. Now, I want to caveat that, which is, as long as you're producing sperm, there are many ways through assisted reproduction that you can have kids.
Yeah.
But your odds of naturally conceiving with your partner go down every year you get older.
Yeah.
And by the time you're turning, I'd say probably closer to 40, right? That's the point at which really your fertility as a man has actually gone down quite a bit.
Wow. And I mean, I'm going to have my doctor on at a later point in this, and I'm going to butcher what he said to me in that moment, but I sort of blocked out because I was like a little traumatized. I was like, oh no.
It's shocking news.
He essentially, I remember him walking me through, like he would put my sperm into a petri dish.
Yep.
And my mobility in my sperm was really poor.
Yeah.
And he's like, basically I can like get this one to work.
Wow.
And like he made like this little wiggle movement.
Yeah.
And I was like, wait, get this. I was like, what? So
Sure.
I guess like our society has now forced our medical advances to have to perform at an even higher level to keep fertility up.
To counteract, actually, you're absolutely right, to counteract the natural declines in sperm. And if you look at some countries that are very progressive with things like IVF, which is in vitro fertilization, it's a form of assisted reproduction. 1 in 10 babies in Denmark is born through IVF.
Wow.
It's a huge number. In the US, by the way, it's about 1 in 100 because it's so much more expensive here in the United States. But it just goes to show you that there's a lot of reasons why people are choosing assisted reproduction over natural reproduction. One of the reasons is actually your sperm quality is lower. You're less fertile than you were. You're less able to have a healthy child relative to 30 or 40 years ago.
What is the most fertile country?
Ooh.
Or
This may not be the absolute highest fertility rate, but I will say one of the highest in the world is Nigeria. And I say this because at current birth rates, if you compare the trajectory that China and Nigeria are on, by the end of the century, Nigeria will have a larger population than China.
Holy.
So obviously there's a lot of projection involved there, things will change, but just to show you kind of just how low the Chinese birth rate is and just how high the Nigerian birth rate is, because I always think about China as being the most populous country in the world.
Right.
But actually they're just totally going in opposite directions. And so the Nigerians, if you are Nigerian or have a Nigerian friend, compliment them on their fertility. Just very high.
I'm immediately. I do actually. That was one thing I loved. I loved about football was the melting pot of cultures in the locker rooms. I actually have a friend who's from Nigeria.
I mean, if he winks at someone the wrong way,
pregnant.
I mean, they're pregnant.
Oh gosh, I'm gonna have to give him a call after this. Oh gosh. Where does the U.S. fall on that? And as far as rankings go, is there even a fertility ranking?
There kind of is. So I wanna be clear though that total fertile rate or total fertility rate is a little bit different than. So how fertile a population is a little different from how many babies a population is having, because there are many things that affect the number of babies you have that include like economics, how much social support is there in the country, how normal is it to have 5 kids versus 2 kids, and so I want to preface that they're imperfect comparisons, but I will say America's birth rate is low on an objective basis.
Okay.
So you need about 2.1 babies per woman to have what's called population maintenance, which means that your population stays the same size over time. You need about 2.1 babies. The U.S. and most of the developed world is actually below that. The U.S. is about 1.7, 1.75, if I remember correctly, which means the U.S. population is actually declining. And it's interesting because if you look at immigrant Americans, people who've immigrated from other countries, their birth rates are more like 2.5 babies per woman. If you look at Americans who've been here for several generations, actually their birth rate is more like 1.5 babies per woman. And so it's interesting because it's creating this bifurcation in society around what types of Americans are having more or less kids. And you're seeing this played out in many countries across the world. But if you look at Europe, if I remember correctly, Germany's birth rate was about 1.3, 1.4 babies per woman. Wow. Extremely low. And when you get to certain countries in Asia, South Korea, Hong Kong, I mean, you're talking about birth rates that are more like 0.9 babies per woman, 1 baby per woman, right? Which means that they're getting half of the babies that they need to maintain their population size. It's fascinating globally. And my belief has always been legacy is solving a global problem. Like infertility is not an American problem. Infertility is a worldwide problem, except in Nigeria, apparently.
Your market in Nigeria is going to be different.
It's going to be a big market. Actually, we wouldn't have a market. We wouldn't have a market. But it is a global problem. And my vision has always been we should be serving all men, people with sperm. Everyone all over the world should be testing or freezing their sperm.
Are you guys in the U.S. only right now?
We're in the U.S. only right now. Operate nationwide, though.
Yeah. And you have different freezing. You were saying you have different, freezing capabilities and storage throughout the country.
That's right.
I think it's incredible that you're splitting.
Yeah.
I want to go back just because I'm curious too with trans women. and their choice to freeze their sperm.
Right.
When in the process do they? Do you know like is it prime for them to do that?
Yeah.
And just the importance of it for our trans community.
Yeah, so I'll touch on the trans side of things. Then I want to talk a little bit about kind of the LGBTQIA plus community more broadly. But if you are trans, then you should be freezing your sperm before starting any sort of hormone replacement therapy.
Okay.
Right? Because that is just causing changes in your body that are going to affect your fertility, are going to affect your sperm production.
Yep.
So you should be doing it before you start any kind of hormonal treatments, certainly before any physical treatments.
Got it.
And then if you are kind of just more broadly, if you're going to have a more complex fertility journey, you should just be, I mean, here's my honest kind of unfiltered take on it. If you know that you are gay, and if you know that you plan on having a child or think you might want to have a child someday in the future, with another man, you should freeze your sperm right away. Like, you're going to have to use that sperm in the future, most likely.
Yeah.
So if you're 20, freeze your sperm. It's that simple to me, right? Like, you will be using it. Maybe you'll be 30 or 35 or 40 when the time comes, but you will then have a fresh sample that has been frozen for 10 or 20 years.
Yep.
That is the youngest, healthiest sperm that you've locked in a moment in time.
Yeah.
And a lot of people don't know this, but you can freeze sperm indefinitely, like decades, maybe even centuries, with no loss in quality. You and I could freeze our sperm right now and use it in 100 years.
Huh.
Which is weird, but
yeah.
and we know this because samples have been unfrozen after 40 plus years and used to have twins, right? And the sample was basically as fresh as it was the day that it was frozen.
Wow.
Which is fascinating to me.
Well, you hear it all the time. I know when we were going through this process, choosing our egg donor, the age range that they gave us for what a healthy egg donor was, we were blown away at.
What did they give you?
I mean, I think it was, once again, I could misquote. I'll ask my doctor when he's on here.
Sure.
I think it was like anything past 24 was technically old. I mean, I just was like, wait, hold on. I'm 30 donating my sperm. So what does that make my sperm?
Yeah.
If 24 is old, what is like, what am I?
Sure.
And you hear, there's so much pressure put on women to freeze their eggs, to make the decision if they want children, to do it all. I mean, I am still growing and still growing up and still learning things.
Yeah.
I couldn't imagine having to make that type of decision at 24.
No, we are what you're hitting on is that there's a fundamental mismatch between our society and our biology.
For
our
sure.
society, and by the way, if you look at the stats around birth rates, a couple years ago it came out that more women were having their first child in the 31 to 35 age range than the 26 to 30 age range. That's a pretty shocking shift relative to a few decades ago. And our society and our desire to have kids at a later age in life, right? So I'm turning 35 in a few days. I don't even have any kids that I know of, right?
Yeah.
And, I feel ready to have kids soon, but I would not have felt ready 5 years ago. Biologically, my body was ready to have kids, 18, 19, 20, maybe even before then, right? And so physically, biologically, we're hardwired to be ready for kids in our, honestly, late teens and early 20s. But as a society, we don't want to have kids until we're in our 30s. And so you just have this mismatch. And that's why we're doing so much assisted reproduction, because our bodies were not really wired in the same way to have kids in our 30s or 40s or 50s and so on.
Right. I mean, I think my mom was 23 when I was born.
Wow. Yeah.
And now, I'm...
Yeah. And look at you. Look how you turned out.
Yeah, right? Exactly. And I mean, I'm going on 32 this month, and then my husband is
Capricorn
40.
as well?
Aquarius.
Yeah,
okay. Sorry.
It's fine.
But and it's just, it was really interesting because I always knew I wanted to be a young, cool dad.
Yeah.
That was sort of my goal. Right?
Yeah.
I mean, I loved football and I wanted to be a football player, but I wanted to be a dad more
sweet.
than anything. And I've told Jordan this too. I think I would have around this time, even if I was single, I would have gone on this journey by myself.
Yeah.
Just because I think I wanted kids and I wanted a family that bad.
Yeah.
And I I've learned so much and I'm continuing to, and it's just like mind blowing where our society is right now.
Yeah.
And how casual we're being about it.
You're not alone in saying that. And there's actually been a rise in single parents over the years where someone who, just says, hey, for whatever reason, I haven't found the perfect person. I really want to be a father. I really want to be a mother.
Yeah.
I feel the same way you do, by the way. From a very young age, I was a weirdo among my friends. I used to have in college, I knew I wanted to be a husband and father. I love the idea of having, a couple of kids.
Yep.
And I think, by the way, there's an inherent narcissism in that. I think that you want little creatures that kind of look like you.
Totally.
And kind of act like you. But even in college, I used to have a folder of like articles that I had saved on how to be a good parent.
Wow.
And so, I totally understand wanting to have kids and knowing that you want to have kids. And there's a lot more men nowadays who are saying, you know what, if I'm going to be a single dad, so be it. Maybe I'll have a child today and then meet the right person in a few years' time. So you're definitely not alone in saying that.
Incredible.
And thankfully, you found Jordan. It seems like you two are going to be wonderful together.
Yeah, thank you.
As parents, and so.
Yeah. Oh, I can't wait. I mean, we're so excited. But I want to continue too because I have so many questions just about sperm in general.
Sure, let's go. My favorite topic. Let's go.
Yes. So I guess just can you talk me through STIs and the misconceptions of being able to freeze sperm? If you have STIs, should you get tested before?
Yeah.
That's also a service you guys provide. And once again, something that I would much rather test for STIs and STDs from home.
100%.
And can you just talk about that process and what that looks like?
Yeah, absolutely. So a lot of people don't realize that STIs can actually harm your fertility, can permanently impair your fertility. And so there's certain STIs like chlamydia, like gonorrhea, like HIV that can directly impact your fertility.
On a DNA level?
The DNA... I'm not the best person to talk about the biology of how it causes it, but I can tell you, chlamydia, gonorrhea, HIV, all can permanently impair your fertility. Other STIs like herpes, like hepatitis, like syphilis can indirectly affect your fertility as well. So they could actually prevent you from being able to have a child in the future. So what I always say is if you are part of a community that for whatever reason is more exposed or more likely to be exposed to an STI, you should absolutely be freezing your sperm, without having had an STI. That said, if you do have an STI, then you can still freeze your sperm. Okay. In our case, what we do is we actually store them in separate tanks from samples that are not STI positive, but you can still freeze a sample. You can still use the sample in the future, but there will be additional hoops that you will have to jump through with your clinic when the time comes. Okay. There's just, your partner, of course, would need to be made aware and so on and so forth. So just, you don't want to go through that process.
Right.
Ideally.
Right.
You can if you need to, but that's why we recommend freeze your sperm if you're engaging in any behaviors that may lead to an increased risk of STIs.
Got it. And then as STIs and HIV, are they treated the same in the fertility journey, or are they treated different?
Any STI is treated basically as you store it in a separate cryo storage container.
Got it.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
All right, let's get into the questions.
Let's go.
I'm excited for this to see how I do. I think you're gonna probably nail this.
For the record, I haven't seen these questions.
I haven't either.
I don't know what the questions are.
Great.
Yeah. Okay.
All right, I'm going to let you kick it off. Here we go. This is going to be fun.
All right. Colton, true or false? Semen and sperm are two different things.
Are two different? True. They're different.
They are different. Semen is the fluid that comes out. It's what contains the sperm cells. Only 3 to 5% of semen actually has sperm cells. Sperm is what we think of as, the stuff that, the motion that your doctor made. The little, right? What wiggles under a microscope. That's sperm. Semen is a mix of different things, but it's more, the seminal fluid, what comes out is more than just sperm.
Okay. So, got it. The more you know. I got one right. I'm 1 for 1. All right, here you go. Throwing it back to you.
Okay.
How many times bigger is a rat's sperm than a human sperm?
I actually have no idea. I don't know.
It's 5 times bigger.
A rat has 5 times bigger sperm than a guy.
Than a human.
Especially living in a city like New York. That is a terrifying.
That's why there's so many rats.
They're eating. It's all the pizza they're eating.
Oh, look at that. Okay. That's why they're so successful.
All right, back at you. Is a child's biological sex determined by the sperm or the egg?
Ooh. Is both an answer?
Nope.
It's not. Isn't the egg? No, it's the sperm.
It is the sperm.
So the sperm.
It is the sperm. So the sperm can either carry a female X chromosome or a male Y chromosome. And so the chromosome will either be XX and therefore will be female, or it will be XY and therefore will be male. And so it is actually the sperm that determines if it is X or Y. As a side fun fact, the X chromosome and the Y chromosome actually weigh different amounts.
Okay.
And so there are ways that you can try to separate out sperm by weight to try to separate out those which are X chromosome versus those that are Y chromosome. and therefore try to influence the likelihood that you would have a boy or a girl.
Wow.
Yeah.
I'm going to say something I know I'm going to get made fun of for saying this,
Sure.
but when I was growing up, I used to think whoever put in more effort during sex, whichever gender put in more effort during sex was the one who won the baby. Oh, and also I think of importance too for, the gay community, because I know, at times when you're paying a lot of money to go through this process, I know of friends who were like, I want, boys, or I want girls, or I want, and they do have the capability. So you're saying they do have the capabilities to at least give you a better percentage or a better shot to make male or female embryos?
So there's a couple of different things. And I want to preface this by saying what you're describing is called sex selection, which is actually illegal in almost every country in the world.
Wow.
The USA and the United Arab Emirates are two of the very few countries that allow it, but it's actually outlawed in most countries because they don't want you deciding if you want to have a boy or a girl, especially in cultures where certain cultures have a preference for having a boy, right? And so you don't want to be in a situation where every couple is choosing to have one gender over the other.
That's interesting.
So it's super fascinating. The U.S. is one of the very few countries that actually allow.
So there's only two, the U.S. and you said
there might be others. Those are the two big ones that I know off the top of my head. But it is a very, very small number of countries that allow it.
Interesting.
And so the way you would do it actually is you would bring the sperm and the egg together. You would create the embryo, and then you can actually screen the embryos for what gender that embryo is. In other words, does it have an X or a Y chromosome from the sperm?
Yeah.
And you could screen them accordingly and say, okay, well, here you have 4 male embryos, you have 4 female embryos. Which would you like to use? Do you have a preference on gender?
Got it.
Yeah.
Incredible.
Yeah.
All right. My second question.
It's not about rats, is it?
No. I'm moving off of rats.
Okay, good.
Why is semen sticky?
I actually think, I don't know the scientific answer for this. I would guess it's the proteins. And I know that they're, in particular, to get stickier when it's activated by heat.
Okay.
So that's what I would guess. I'm not sure if that's right or not, though.
You're close. Yeah. It's glucose.
Okay. It's a glucose.
It's because it has glucose in it, which is sugars, right?
Sugar.
Okay.
Yeah. Sugar.
So the sugar and protein.
Sugar and protein.
You were onto something.
Part of a healthy meal.
Yeah.
Okay. Do sperm prefer cool or warm climates?
Warm.
Why do you think that?
Because I feel like if you're answering if like a human body runs hot or cold, we're hot. And excessive heat is poor for it.
Yep.
So I would say hot because it.
So sperm does not want to be exposed to saunas and hot tubs, right? And so what a lot of people don't know is the reason the scrotum hangs away, the testicles descend and hang away from the body, is that they're actually at a slightly lower temperature than the rest of the body. And so that's why something like biking is bad for your sperm, because it's actually keeping your testicles right by your body for the duration of the bike ride.
Interesting.
And so that heat negatively affects spermatogenesis, like the production of sperm. And so sperm actually wants to be a little cooler than room temperature.
Wait, so I bet this was not on many people's bingo cards for 2024. Is Colton talking about ball sack temperature? Is the ball... Is the scrotum, I should use the proper anatomy words, is the scrotum a different temperature than the rest of the male body?
Yeah. It's a little bit cooler.
It is a little bit cooler.
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah,
okay.
That's why it hangs.
Look at that.
Yeah.
I'm so proud of my body.
It's
really doing its thing.
It's fascinating.
All right. If one testicle is lost, can you still reproduce with one?
You can still reproduce with one testicle.
Wow. Does it change your count?
That's an interesting question. I actually would.
I would not hold you to it.
Yeah,
so.
I would guess. Take this with a grain of salt. I would guess that it would impair sperm production as a whole, but you would definitely still be able to conceive.
Okay. Yeah. Going off of testicles, why is sorry to the women in here. Why is one testicle larger than the other?
I don't think there's any real reason for it. I think it's the same way that women will have one breast larger than the other. I think it's just natural development of the body.
Okay.
But as far as I know, there's no scientific reason behind it.
Got it.
Yeah.
Cool. Always just been curious.
Yeah.
I love getting into this.
How long does it take for a single sperm to be produced?
Just one.
Yeah.
Well,
because I know when your body was starting today, how long would it take for you to produce sperm?
Well, I'm assuming because I've seen some of my numbers off of my tests that I have like millions and millions of sperm. So just to make one, is it a second?
Yeah. So interestingly, it's actually the other way around, where it takes the body, the full spermatogenesis cycle is about 2.5 to 3 months. So in other words, that's how long it takes for your body to produce sperm, which means that lifestyle changes that you're making today might not actually show up in your sperm parameters for 2.5 or 3 months. And so let's say you start eating super healthy, you're working out the right amount, you switch to a Mediterranean diet, which is one of the best, you won't see the results right away.
That's why it took me 6 months to rehabilitate
Correct.
my. Like they wouldn't even take my samples for that
we
3
always
or
say
4.
a semen analysis is a snapshot in time, and it is accurate but imprecise. And so you'll typically want to come back. You'll make lifestyle changes. You'll come back after a few months. You'll test it again.
Wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then is it ever so like if I got in the hot tub sauna and completely deep, like can you completely become sterile from if you sauna too much?
I've always thought this is fascinating, and I'm meeting tomorrow in San Francisco with a guy who's developing a contraceptive for men.
Okay.
But there's always been this interesting question, well, if we know all these lifestyle changes can improve your sperm quality, what if you went the other direction? So in theory, first of all, if you started taking TRT, you're basically infertile. Yep. If you did sauna, hot tub, hot bath every day, if you had fast food and junk every day, if you wore really tight underwear that is ideally not nylon, what's it, like polyester.
Yeah.
I mean, it would very negatively impact your
The
sperm
one thing
quality.
I have going for me is I go commando. So I feel like that's
Are you
healthy.
commando right now?
Yes.
I think the viewers want to know.
Yes, I am guilty of being commando. The only time I don't go commando is when I work out.
Okay, nice.
Just
I think
for obvious
the
reasons
people in
there.
the gym probably appreciate
The
that.
people
Or
at the
don't.
gym.
I'm not sure.
Yeah. Well, it's a mixed
Little
crowd these
this,
days.
Little that.
Shoot.
Funny. So yeah.
All right, back to me.
Okay.
Can dead sperm still make babies?
Ooh, this is interesting. I'm going to give 2 answers to this. So first of all, there's something called posthumous sperm extraction.
Okay.
Which is when someone dies, you can immediately go in to extract sperm and then use that to have a child if you do it within a certain time window. So the military sometimes does this, right? Someone gets killed in action, you can still actually preserve their sperm and use it for to have children in the future. If the sperm itself is not moving, it's not motile, there are still ways to have a child. It's just much more difficult. I know that much.
Yeah.
So that would be my answer. Okay. But we freeze the sperm for the Navy SEALs.
Okay.
We freeze the sperm for the Green Berets.
Wow.
We freeze the sperm, test and freeze for veterans. We work a lot with the U.S. military, which makes sense when you think about it, because these are people who are exposed to the risk of being wounded in action, killed in action, chemical exposures, burn pits, all the stuff which is terrible for your fertility.
Is that covered by the government?
So it is if you get, so there's nuance to it, but you would have to get a semen analysis, which you can actually do through us, right, to help validate that you would need that. But the general stat is that men in the military are twice as likely to face infertility as a civilian, someone who's not in the military. There's a lot of reasons. So those are some of the reasons why. But we work a ton with the military for that reason, and a lot of times they will ask us, hey, what happens if I'm killed in action? Can you still use my sperm?
Wow.
Yeah.
That's, I mean, I would think it would be a no-brainer for most men.
It makes a ton of sense. And the answer is yes, but you have to sign. We have very specific regulations. We call it the bequeathment form, which is you have to pre-authorize, of course, and notarize and signed and everything, that your partner would be entitled to use your sperm in the case of your death.
Yeah, so that was another interesting thing that Jordan and I experienced that nobody preps you on. Yeah. We went straight from him freezing his sperm and us making all these decisions into another room with a notary.
Yeah, tons of legal documents.
I mean, it took us 45 minutes to sign the documents.
Wow.
And it actually legally changes between 24 to 48 hours to 72 hours. The windows even changed who goes where. What happens if we both pass at the same time, simultaneously?
Oh, wow. Right.
So we were
Car crash
signing
or something.
And nobody prepared us.
And it's so morbid.
It was so morbid. It was so
morbid.
we took. I remember we took the rest of the day off. We went and we thought we were casually going to go.
Yeah.
I'll say it like this: jerk off into cups at noon, and walk out at 1 and be like skippy and happy.
Yeah.
We left the facility at 3, and we were like so emotionally drained.
It's heavy.
We took the rest of the day off because we had to sit there and fill out forms of like thinking through for the first time.
Yeah.
if we pass, who has access to our sperm?
God,
Do we want them to be able to make kids? We were like not prepared to answer those questions and had to talk about it in that room for the very, very first time. So I think that was another thing, you know, as
You're just
people
not
are
prepared for.
as people are talking about this, is being able to take the time and to also educate yourself of this is a larger decision. It's not an easy, I'm going to go jack off into the cup and be done for the day.
Sure.
It's a heavy moment.
It really is. It really is. Wow.
And also just why, you know, I wanted to do this. Because I think I had so many questions. I still do.
Yeah.
And a lot of my family members and friends do as well. Wow. So can you talk a little bit about Legacy and what you are doing to help, one, just for the public? Because I still think there's a lot of stigma around reproduction. I still think there's a lot of shame for men around fertility. Yeah. What are you guys doing as a company to help that?
Yeah, it's a good question. There's a lot of education and awareness involved that's involved in this. So a lot of it is even on the science side. We fund studies, we run studies. You know, we had a collaboration with Harvard University that we published last year. So a lot of it is simply educating people around sperm, right? And typically someone who's in the world of press, you know, it's interesting and it's novel to hear about the decline in sperm counts. It's something that people need to hear. The second is we invest a lot of time in just educating people, right? Going on podcasts like this one, right? Who reach people who might not otherwise be exposed to this kind of information, right? You have a very special kind of target audience from over the years. So certainly that's a big part of our role. And then the third is, how do you normalize this?
Right.
How do you get celebrities to invest in your company and maybe talk about why they're testing or freezing their sperm? And not a lot of people know, but stand-up comedians have been starting to talk more and more about sperm. So,
in their materials or just in general?
In their materials. So
really?
Mike Birbiglia did a hilarious bit about it. Hassan Minhaj did a bit about basically being infertile and what he did to actually treat it. Jimmy Carr had a hilarious set about this. And this is stuff you wouldn't have seen 3, 4, or 5 years ago. And so I see part of our role is helping encourage and facilitate these kinds of conversations. And in particular, anything that can use humor to shed light onto a very serious topic. And something I always say is sperm is funny, right, until it's not.
Yeah.
Right? Sperm is funny when you're 13 and you're in the locker room, right, until you're trying to have a child with a person you love the most in the world.
Right.
So that's how we think about it.
Until you've been mature enough to handle it. And
exactly.
You still giggle. I mean, I'm guilty of it too, even here today. You know,
I am too. I've been doing this a long time.
Yeah. It's a funny thing.
It is. It is.
I want to go over my results with you. Okay. I'm going to pull out my phone and pull up the data.
Let's whip it out.
I think that's part of it. I think it's not great. I will tell you that. A lot of my indicators were low. But I do feel like I've always been an oversharer, and I've grown up in front of the public, so I think it's, you know.
It is so important you're doing this, by the way, for other men who maybe aren't as in good shape or as fit or handsome as someone like you, to look at you and say, hey, you know what? He's being open about this. This gives me a lot of room and comfort to be able to talk about it myself.
Yeah.
So just honestly, kudos to you for being willing to share. And I also have to interject, for my legal team strangles me. I need to interject with a little disclaimer, you know, the kind of the end of pharma commercials that are like,
perfect.
Right?
Can you do it as fast?
Yeah.
No, I'm kidding.
I'm not a medical doctor. What I will share is not medical advice. I can only comment on any information that you choose to share. So I'm not going to volunteer, of course, any of your personal health information. I can only react to what you share. And anything I say should not be taken as medical advice, but simply the perspective of someone who's been working in the world of sperm for, 6, 7 years at this point.
And I think it's also important, I brought this up to you previously, and I said, you can just bring my results. And you're like, I actually don't get your name.
Correct. I actually did not know you had done it. Okay. We anonymize everything. I have friends who will come to me and say, hey, man, I used your service. I'm like, I actually had no idea. I can't go and get your results unless we have to go through a special process for anyone outside of your immediate team that is handling your results to get the results. And we do this because we work a lot with celebrities, big tech CEOs, a lot of people whose names you would know. And it is extremely important to me that we have the highest level of data privacy. So I actually did not know until you sent me the screenshot of your results. That's only when I saw them for the first time.
Well, it's interesting because that's, for Jordan and I, it's really important. We're not, we're stepping back into being a little more public. We love our private life right now, and we love being selective. And also I think what I've learned over my years, because I've been a very public person, and then I sort of went in hid for a while and then
Sure.
I can't, you know.
Sure.
I think it's healthy to celebrate little moments and to also like just take time to process things and with privacy and then share it with the public when you feel if it's appropriate. So that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to walk through. What I will say is after going through the process with Legacy, it was so seamless. The results were in within 48 hours for me. The optics in the bar and it's really well done. The interface is incredible. So congrats.
Thank you.
I'm going to start in the upper left box with my total count. So my total count is 29.17 million sperm. And on the range, it's low. What is average and what is numbers you typically want to see there?
So there's something called the WHO manual. The World Health Organization basically has what is deemed to be normal or abnormal ranges for different, for each of your semen parameters. I mean, typically you'd want to be producing at least, call it 39 million sperm count based on the most recent, WHO manual.
Okay.
What I will say is this, though, before we dive in, and what's important for anyone to hear is the normal parameters for semen are actually pretty far off from what we see with most men. And to drive that point home, there was a study in Switzerland of Swiss men in the military, so young, healthy, peak physical condition, all of whom produced a semen sample for the military as part of their kind of basic training. And about 2/3 of those men came back with at least one semen result or kind of parameter result that was below the normal range. So just to say, no one should be shocked if they have one or even two semen parameters that are below the normal range. We typically look at things in totality to get a sense of, okay, as a whole, how do we feel about your sperm sample? So all to say, you said about 29.7 million sperm count. That's a little on the lower end, but you're still producing tens of millions of sperm, which is good.
So just curious, because I obviously know it takes 3 months for the life of your sperm.
Correct.
How many sperm are currently like in me? Because like obviously you can jack off multiple times a day, week, month. How many is there like an average count or like?
That's an interesting question. I know that with repeated ejaculations, you're actually getting less and less sperm in the ejaculation. So if you masturbated 7 times a day, which would be a lot, right? By the 7th,
don't think I've ever gotten to 7 in a day.
I'm sure when we were 13,
we try. I know a lot of men out there have probably been like, I'm going to try this.
Everyone's mentally thinking about their maximum. If you're listening with another person, ask them what their maximum is. So the amount of sperm coming out in the semen, which is the liquid, would actually get progressively lower and lower and lower. So I would guess, and take this with a huge grain of salt, I would guess that you probably have 50 to 100 million sperm count right now.
Okay.
I would guess, but that should actually come from a doctor.
Yeah. Well, and I will say to note, on the instructions from Legacy, it wanted me to sustain from masturbation for 3 to 5 days.
Correct. Yeah, that's kind of the optimal window. Interestingly, some people think that abstaining for longer is better, but actually at some point you end up having a lot of dead sperm in your sample. And so you actually 2 to 7 is kind of the broad ends of the range. But we've had 25,000-30,000 people go through Legacy at this point. So we know with a high degree of confidence, 3 to 4 days of abstinence is the optimal amount of abstinence. And this is also in line with scientific literature that validates basically the work we do, which is yes, it is 3 to 4 days of abstinence.
Yeah, and then another thing to note too, just because no lube.
Yeah. No lube, no saliva, all of those can introduce bacteria into the sample.
Got it.
So for some people, it's a new experience.
Cool. All right. This is where they start getting even lower. The total, I need your help on, is it modal?
Modal sperm count.
So total modal sperm count. Is that mobility? Or no?
That is, I'll actually tell you the formula in a second, but
sorry. So total modal count is 6.78 million swimming sperm. And it is on the very low end.
Yeah. So the formula for total modal count, and again, I will say, if you have millions of sperm that are swimming, that's still considered, certainly usable for all forms of kind of assisted reproduction. You're still in the millions, not in the hundreds or thousands, right? But still, it is below the normal range. Total modal count is probably the most important factor to look at because it actually factors in the volume of sperm that you're producing, the volume of semen that you're producing. It factors in the concentration of your sperm, so how much sperm per milliliter, and it factors in the count of your sperm. So it's basically saying, okay, you're producing this much sperm per milliliter,
Yes.
right? Here's how many milliliters you're producing. Here's kind of the, here's the motility of your sperm. And so here's kind of the total number of sperm that you have in your sample that is motile, i.e. that is swimming normally.
Got it.
And so again, so at 6.78 million, you're still producing millions of sperm that are swimming. It would be a little bit below the normal range, which would likely be around 20 million.
Okay. I want to get to the one box that I was
Yeah.
proud of myself because
Sure.
it's the only box in here that says normal.
Yeah.
And that is the volume of semen.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I know semen's not really useful,
Yeah.
but my volume was good at 2.25
Yep.
milliliters.
Milliliters, yeah. So
Great.
you typically want to be producing between 1 and 6 milliliters of semen. That's kind of considered normal.
Okay.
Too much is actually bad. If you're producing more than 6 milliliters, that actually could be reflective of a condition that an andrologist or a doctor would want to look at.
So
more
sperm
closely.
doesn't
But-
want to swim
Yeah.
in an ocean. It wants to swim in like a little puddle or pond.
It's more that kind of hyperproduction of semen is actually indicative of a potential condition, like a potential genetic condition.
okay.
So you're good. You're in the clear. You're producing a normal amount. That's great.
Got it.
Yeah.
Great. Good job, Colton. All right, back to the lows. Concentration. I had 12.97 million sperm per milliliter of semen. And it was slightly on the low section. It wasn't the worst of my numbers. But can you
Yeah.
talk through so is that just as compared to the amount of semen comparing to the amount of sperm?
Correct. So actually,
Okay.
you can back into this figure. If we know that you are producing 29.7 million sperm,
Yep.
and we know that the semen is about 2.25 milliliters, the concentration is actually just how much sperm per milliliter. So if you divide 29.7 by 2.25, you're going to end up with 12.97, which would be your concentration.
Okay.
Yeah.
Motility, which is is the movement of my sperm, was at 23.24%. It is in the low section by quite a bit.
Yeah.
So what do you want to see with that number?
Yeah. Typically with motility, you'd want to figure that's more in the 40 to 50% range. Typically, ideally higher than that. When you're using a mail-in kit like ours, there will be a nominal decrease in motility just as it's on its way to the lab. So I would actually probably want to increase that number by, call it 5 or 10%.
Yep.
It would still be a little bit below the normal range. But again, we've seen 25, 30,000 patients. We see a lot of patients whose motility is, 1%.
Got it.
2%. When you're talking single digits, it's really concerning.
Yeah.
If you're in the tens of the percent, right, 23%, that would still be considered, good enough to go for natural intercourse.
Right.
Again, it is below the normal range, but with all the caveats around,
Yeah.
you can be below the quote unquote normal semen parameters. You could be what's considered kind of subfertile, quote unquote, still have a child naturally. And it's actually, it's important for me to take a second to comment on the fact that a semen analysis is an imprecise estimate of your fertility. We see men who have phenomenal sperm numbers. One of my investors actually had almost 1 billion sperm counts.
Wow.
I sadly cannot share names.
Yeah.
Almost 1 billion sperm count who actually wasn't able to conceive for almost a year with his partner, even though you would imagine that person is hyperfertile.
Right.
And we've seen men whose samples are extremely poor and still able to conceive. So this is all meant to be kind of an indicator of your overall fertility and an estimate of how long it might take you to naturally conceive.
Got it.
So if you're if your motility was 1 or 2%, it's certainly possible you might not be able to have a child with years of trying. It's ultimately a game of numbers, right? So maybe there's a 1% chance, and that 1 month is your 1%.
Yeah.
So
Well, I saw 23%. And I was happy because when I first started this in the clinic, it was not a great number.
Really? Okay. So good. Improvement. Yeah. Morphology.
So morphology, the last one, I was at 1%. So of my sperm are shaped normally. So I have a lot of odd looking sperm.
Sure.
Is that accurate? Is that common? What is?
It's morphology.
I have weird sperm.
So first of all, everyone has weird sperm.
Okay.
So the normal morphology range would probably be about 4% or higher.
Okay.
There's a few different ways of assessing morphology. The numbers have changed slightly over the years, but call it 4%. I, by the way, like you, consistently have low morphology. My normal morphology is usually in the 2 or 3%, which is below the normal range of 4%.
Interesting.
So just sharing that as well, which I don't typically share.
Well, I want to say too, because I follow you guys on Instagram.
Yeah.
Obsessed.
Yeah.
At Give Legacy for those wondering.
Yeah. Give Legacy Inc.
Give Legacy Inc.
Yeah.
sperm can have two heads.
Correct. So that's
I
what
saw
was
I saw
gonna
an
say.
image
Yes,
on your Instagram.
100%. So the vast majority of sperm that is produced is abnormal.
Okay.
And it can have two heads. It can have a super long tail. It can have a misshapen head. I mean, there's all kinds of interesting ways that sperm can turn out. The vast majority of any person's sperm is not normal. But there is a natural selection process. So morphology is arguably the least understood of semen parameters because there is inherently a natural selection type of process that is happening when the sperm is kind of making its way to the egg. So what happens if you have misshapen sperm? That sperm is simply just not going to make it.
Right.
And there's increasing scientific evidence that the egg actually kind of chooses the sperm. Right? And this is kind of a more nascent understanding.
Like allows it in?
Kind of, yeah. So there's a belief that actually the egg is involved in choosing which sperm it's going to allow in. So it's not going to allow one in with two heads.
This whole time I thought I was a winner.
Yeah. I mean,
I thought I raced to the egg and I won.
maybe the egg chose you.
Oh,
so
look
that
at that
still makes you a winner.
I'm a chosen
It
one.
still makes you a winner. And so, so morphology is considered by doctors, urologists, andrologists to be the least informative typically. And so that's why I personally have never worried too much about my 2 to 3% morphology. Again, with 1%, it's certainly on the lower range, but it is the least understood. It means you have slightly more abnormal sperm than the average guy, but most guys have extremely abnormal sperm.
Got it.
Yeah.
So I should feel okay with that. I mean,
yeah.
yes, subjectively.
Yeah.
Got it. This is, I mean, to have that access, to have that data
Yeah.
back on my phone within 48 hours was incredible.
Yeah.
And then now I'm looking at next steps. I know I'm getting another kit right now because I want to start working on taking some supplements. And even though, I've already done it, I just think it's an indicator of health.
Right. So I'm glad you mentioned that because it's something I wanted to touch on, which is sperm is a biomarker of your health, right? And we talked about it a little bit earlier on. But sperm is actually predictive of cardiovascular disease, certain types of cancer, diabetes. There was even a study that showed that if your longevity, like your mortality rates, are affected by how good or not good your sperm quality is. So in other words, your sperm can even predict how long you are to live. There is so much we don't know about sperm yet. There's so much to learn, but we do know that sperm is generally reflective of your overall health. And we do know that, when you're young and you're healthy, freeze it.
Yeah. Well, and I know, so on here too, there's a bunch of other information as far as DNA fragmentation.
Right. Did we do a DNA fragmentation?
No, so it says not included. Buy another kit. So I want to talk through some of the other products too, because now that I've gone down this was so easy and useful and resourceful for me.
Yeah.
So what is DNA fragmentation analysis?
So DNA fragmentation, actually, we're the only company that offers this on a mail-in basis. We are able to evaluate basically the DNA integrity of your sperm. So in other words, how much DNA damage there is to your sperm. And this to me is fascinating because we know that your DNA fragmentation scores are associated with things like miscarriages. So if a couple has a miscarriage more than once, your doctor will typically recommend, hey, test for DNA fragmentation. It's possible that your sperm looks healthy on the outside, but actually on the inside has a lot of damaged sperm that is preventing it from successfully fertilizing an egg that will turn into a healthy pregnancy outcome.
Got it.
And so it's something that we're able to test for. And what's so interesting to me is I would suspect, and I want to preface this by saying this is not scientifically evidenced yet, but I would confidently say that I would guess DNA fragmentation rates have been going up and up and up over the years because it's associated with things like chemical exposures. Right, and we are surrounded by BPAs and phthalates and plastics and all the stuff that is in our bloodstream. There's Dr. Shanna Swan, a prolific researcher in the space, said that we ingest about a credit card's worth of microplastics every week, which is just a terrifying thing. And this stuff is so bad for us.
Through food. I've researched that as well, and it's alarming and shocking.
It is. It's terrifying, and there's so little you can do, to address it. But it's our modern life. So I would guess that DNA damage rates have gone up over the years. But it is something we offer for people who want to know how much DNA damage is in their sperm.
And then just curious, because for those freezing with your services as well, do you guys integrate into specific clinics and transfers, or is everybody accept a legacy, or is it you need to talk to your doctor about it?
I mean, you should always talk to your doctor about it. I will say your doctor's always going to want you to do it with them. Right. So even my brother, and I hope he doesn't mind me sharing this, But my brother had used Legacy a long time back, and when he went in for a semen analysis at his local clinic, his doctor wanted him to do it again. Not that they didn't, I mean, our kid's extremely scientifically validated, but a clinician wants you to do it with them on site in their own way. So, but I will say we have had hundreds of withdrawals of people using their samples for pregnancies. We coordinate very closely with clinics, and we've worked with all the largest clinics across the country. And so, we have a team that handles the withdrawal process. There's a million forms you have to sign. Yeah. There's a million things you need to do. But absolutely, at any point, I forget the exact number. I think you have to give our team, I think it's 10 days heads up.
Okay.
And we'll coordinate everything.
Transfers and everything like that.
Yeah. Yeah, we'll ship it across the country. We've shipped internationally. We actually recently shipped a sample to Nigeria, funnily enough.
One person in Nigeria that needed your help.
There was 1 week where we were shipping to Cyprus, Nigeria, and Russia, I think, in a 1 week period.
Because there's
there's a clinic. So someone had done it with us in the US.
Okay.
And then they had moved abroad and wanted it shipped through their clinic there.
Yeah. So, well, one thing that I learned, at least about embryos, and I don't know if this is true about sperm, it's actually more beneficial to implement a frozen embryo, or there's better success, I should say, with a frozen embryo than it is just like live and right away.
Oh, interesting.
Maybe I'm misspeaking on that.
I would guess the reason for that is because you can do all kinds of genetic testing on the embryo, so you would actually screen out unhealthy embryos and then implant healthy ones.
Okay. So that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for this.
Very cool. Yeah.
This has been incredible.
Yeah.
I want to ask, what would be one piece of advice that you can give to parents out there? It's a 2-part question. Okay. Because I think you're qualified for both.
Sure.
What piece of what piece of advice would you give to parents out there? And also, what piece of advice would you give to people trying and those people trying have not been successful yet?
Yeah. Great questions. I mean, I mentioned that I had a folder in college of kind of parenting tips and tricks, and one always stayed with me in particular, which was with your children, you want to reward and praise hard work, not outcomes. And so you have a lot of kids that are, let's say you're born naturally smart, you do really well on tests, and your parents keep praising you for your test results. Yeah. The day that you start doing badly on tests, you're just going to get so demotivated because you've been taught all your life that like the grade is what matters. If you praise your child for the hard work and the effort they put in, not necessarily the outcome, then they're more likely to persevere in the future when they're faced with obstacles. So that one always stayed with me. There's a ton of studies behind it. So praise your kids for their work, not just for the outcomes. I think that's great. And then for couples that are thinking about having kids and have been trying, I mean, the biggest thing I would say is you are very much not alone. It affects about 1 in 6 couples. I guarantee you there's people in your life who have faced something similar, even if they haven't told you about it yet. And it's just give yourself grace. It's tough. People don't talk enough about mental health during the process of trying to conceive. It's very stressful, and it's particularly difficult if you're hearing baby announcements from people in your life, pregnancy announcements from people in your life. So just give yourself grace, give yourself compassion, remind yourself that you are not alone. And also know that lower stress is actually associated with positive pregnancy outcomes. So, the less you focus on the stress of it, actually, the more likely you are to be able to conceive. And then our chief medical officer would berate me, I think, if I didn't also mention, make sure you talk to your doctor, make sure you're both getting tested, and make sure you understand where you're at from a fertility perspective.
Well, I can't tell you, Khaled, that's like, for me, that was one of the biggest things. I left. I had so much anxiety. Yeah, of course. I was stressed out because I was like, my husband's already frozen his. Yeah. The pressure was then put on me. So not that I could ever experience the female's perspective in this, but like all of a sudden I'm like, oh, now it's my turn. Like I have to perform. I have to like figure this out over these next few months. Yeah. And I talked to my therapist about it. Just because like the anxiety and it becomes
it's very real.
It becomes a much larger. It became a very big conversation in our house. Yeah, and I mean, we're 2 men, so we don't even have to like time things up and get ready. Like we have it easy on the grand, on a grand scheme of things. Yeah. So
and I would say to anyone, make sure you listen to all the episodes on Colton's podcast.
Thank you so much. Is there anything else you want to touch on that we didn't get into, or?
If you are in the military, you are covered. You can use our services. If you are at an employer that offers fertility benefits. We cover about 15 million employees who are able to get our product through their employer. If you have insurance coverage anywhere in the United States, you are likely to have insurance coverage for Legacy. We're covered in all 50 states with many major insurers. So there's many ways to get access to Legacy. Obviously, always reach out. We're there to help. And the last thing I would say is talk about sperm. Talk about sperm.
Amen to
That's
that.
why I bought the URL spermking.com a few years ago. And I always say, you have questions, go to the Sperm King. Give us.
I'm going to go to the Sperm King now, right after this.
It actually redirects to my LinkedIn.
Okay, got it. Well, then you've already listened to the Sperm King if you're here on that. But I will say I have...
Yeah.
I would call it early on confided in people because I carried a lot of shame and I was sort of shy about it. And now obviously I'm hosting a podcast all about this. And
you swung in the other direction.
I did,
love it.
but it took me a
Good for
while.
you.
I've been on this for a year and a half and I'm like, wait, why do I feel shame? I was like, I've now talked to, I would say close to hundreds of people, men, who are like, oh yeah, me too.
Yeah.
And then I'm like, well, then why can't we just talk about this normally then if it's not that? So thank you so much for all of
thank you for having me. Thank you for your openness.
I mean, all the information too is super helpful for a lot of people out there. So
Phenomenal.
Thank you so much for joining me.
Awesome. Thank you for having me.
Yeah. What's up, guys? If you want more exclusive behind the scenes content, more access to me, all of the fun things, sign up for my Patreon right here. We'll link it out. I promise you do not want to miss this. Head on over and join me on Patreon.
The ride of your life is daddyhood.